our universe is expanding faster than ever before. The race is already on to reach the Red Planet, and there are many other exciting challenges ahead as we explore the very edges of our geographical boundaries and test the limits of what is possible. We've come to the place where science and adventure converge to find out what NASA is doing to physically prepare our astronauts for the journeys ahead. With some special access passes, we're boldly going where no lifter has gone before. It's NASA, baby, and we're taking you along for the ride.
The Barbell Shrugged team has traveled to Houston, Texas for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For the first time in some 40 years, the World Weightlifting Championships are being held right here on U.S. soil. And we are here to witness the world's best lifters push the limits of possibility. We've also come to teach the sport of weightlifting at our very first coaching summit. If we've learned anything from this sport, it's that sharing and seeking knowledge is the key to overcoming any challenge. And also, that the only thing that feels better than setting a record in the gym is helping someone else do the same. But this is all just a start, because we've also come to Texas for the bucket list chance to tour NASA's Johnson Space Center, where some of the bravest human beings alive prepare for liftoff. There are some 13,000 people at NASA, all working tirelessly to get 6 crew members to orbit and back home safely. Our guide today is Yamil Garcia, one of NASA's ACERs, an astronaut strength, conditioning, and rehabilitation specialist. With a background in athletics and coaching, Yamil heads up a team of trainers that ensures the strength and well-being of every NASA astronaut aboard the International Space Station. There's so much to see and learn here, and so little time. So let's get right to the practical lessons.
I think you probably have the record now in terms of longest distance remote coaching relationship between client and coach. It has to be some. I was like, what are the challenges when you are communicating via email to somebody who's orbiting the planet? You're trying to assess how their training is going, because we can do that via email with somebody across town, somebody across the country, maybe across the world, see Skype chats, whatever, to maintain some kind of connection. But the big challenge of any real coach is to understand all aspects of that person's behavior, where their mood is at, how's it going, how do you feel joint-wise. The communication gap is literally quite wide. Yeah. What are the challenges you face with maintaining the relationship?
You cannot read as you would with somebody in the gym. You just talk, hey, how are you doing today? Do you sleep all right last night? Did you eat? Yeah. Did you do your warm-up, everything? No, it just takes for us to look at a video that gets downloaded, to get some information, a little bit of chit-chat behind email. So in about a week I can get back to you and how you feel and how we're going to modify it when we looked at that. So we learned to kind of look ahead. We work with them 2 years prior to launch, so we get to know them for relatively well. Mm-hmm. And when they're not hitting their marks, when they get into the lifting of the weights, if they're not hitting the marks that we have prescribed for them at that point, then you kind of follow up, right? It's what any coach does. To make sure that their athlete is performing at the expected level or correct any of the prescription that we have. Big challenge, it's a couple seconds from here to transmit something to the International Space Station. Mm-hmm. We're getting ready, as we go and move forward to go to the moon at some point. That's about 4 to 7 seconds, depending on what it got. And then going to Mars, where it's basically a total of 14 minutes from the signal to go one place to come back. Mm-hmm. So if we have an event where we have to correct somebody, it's going to be 14 minutes before you are actually able to. Hey, you're rounding your back. You rounded your back. For the next time, correct it.
How far away are we from just being able to just FaceTime an astronaut and just like say, hey, what's up? Like, how'd you feel today? And he can just talk to you like normal.
Pretty close.
Pretty close?
Yeah. Wow. So we have our hardware. We have the advanced resistive exercise device have a laptop basically attached to it. So they are able to upload some videos and do some things. We have right now tablets on orbit that we are seeing how we could do our own apps. So that we can coach just like like anybody else, or if there's anything in industry out there, right? Everybody it's trying to look at the most efficient way and cost-effective way to do it, but it's interacting with them. Yeah, we would like to be there coaching them live and tell them to do the correct thing. Don't round your back, get your chest up. You did not load that machine right, so you're about to break it. That kind of thing is going to be pretty important.
How much data are you getting back from the individual astronauts as far as their strength levels, like over the course of weeks or months, where you can see if there's like some type of like dramatic decrease in strength levels for the 6 months or so that they're in the space station?
We get every workout that we do in space. We get that data. We have
is that them logging it, or is it the machines giving you the data, the force output and whatnot? How does that work?
So we preload what we are planning for them, the programming for them before they go on orbit, before they launch. We have up to we try to do about 6 weeks ahead, and then do adjustment. And it takes about 2 weeks to learn how to exercise in space, how your body's going to behave, how you're going to feel against the machine. That takes a little bit of time. But we get every single piece of data back, from heart rate to how many strides they did on the treadmill. The whole idea behind exercise is to do with stress so that we adapt to that stress. Same thing in space. We are beginning to add a different stress that we did not see in space. It looks similar when we do on the ground, but it's different in space. So we progress it and get that data. Tells us. We add the communication via email, video. When we talk to them, every once in a while we get to chat with them, via the phone. They'll call you and you have a conversation. And that type of interaction altogether provides all the data.
So far, only around 546 people have ever been into space, making astronauts a rare breed. But consider that they aren't necessarily talented athletes or elite human beings. They're actually just everyday Joes, with a lifelong passion for pursuing science and exploration. So, what are the physiological demands of space travel? And how does NASA prepare the crew to exist in an environment not fit for life?
The two hardest things for an astronaut physiologically is launch. From launch to get into space and then return. So you're going from one gravity to microgravity, close to zero, and the other one is you're coming from 6 months of not spending any gravity to having to fight it. So you're not used to contracting your muscles on your legs the same way. So you have a problem with orthostasis. So we try to, you go into a syncope where you pass out. So natural mechanism of the body to provide support for themselves to go lay flat, because you cannot keep all that volume and all the pressure that you need to. So that's one of those early challenges that we have. Neurovestibular, right? So inner ear, they're not using it. Up and down doesn't matter anything in space. So they come back down, they are low blood volume, they don't know anymore what's up and down, and they get hit by gravity. So locomotor type of activities are immediately post-landing kind of the hardest thing that you'll see. They tend to have to sit down and lay down, and some of them you may need to kind of push a lot of fluids in there to try to compensate for that.
How quickly do you re-engage and get them back to training? Because the first thought is like, well, if I'm a highly trained athlete, I take a lot of time off and I lose a lot of muscle mass, I'm rusty. That's one thing. Being rusty for Earth, not being able to function, then getting back to full strength. What's your basic approach for how you re-intervene and get them loading again here? I guess your job is also to get them recovered, back up and going, so they can return to mission control, re-engage and get back to their lives and their work. It must be a tricky procedure.
We get them in here. Right now they're landing in Russia, so we put them on a plane immediately, and they fly back.
More flying?
17, yeah. We lay them back on their backs. We put a plane, and we bring them back as quick as we can so we can do a lot of science. So the particular of that one is science. When they were landing in the U.S., we mentioned earlier that we do testing in 1 to 2 hours post-landing, if you were really lucky, you start doing some of your science. From the recovery perspective, after they get done with all their testing, all that scientific testing that they have to do, we have them for 2 hours a day, every day for 45 days. And we begin with just walking, loading, balance type of activities, and they gradually improve during that first week fairly quickly with that balance. The strength, we're getting better with time, understanding how to train folks in space, the exercise hardware that we have. So their strength have been maintained quite a bit. So that's been surprising. So
strength is preserved. It's one of the best things you can cultivate in yourself, right? If you are strong, you have a better chance of surviving here in space when you come back.
Exactly. It gets you. It gives you the tools to do the job anywhere you are. Eventually, when you come back on the ground.
But before they come back, the crew call the International Space Station their home. Orbiting approximately 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface, this community in the sky serves as a one-of-a-kind microgravity environment for scientific research. And it really is a global community. With over $100 billion of investment from nations across the planet, including Russia, Germany, Great Britain, the US, Japan, Italy, and Spain. The construction and maintenance of this spacecraft is an astounding example of team effort. Pooling resources and research efforts, the crew manning the ISS serves as an example for everyone here on Earth. A collective effort of immense scale, with the ultimate aim of bettering humanity. Our first tour stop is Mission Control, where we'll see how the crew down here communicates and supports their teammates up in space.
This is what makes the International Space Station kind of run. Right now we're in a loss of signal. That's why you don't have any cameras in front of it. And if you look to the upper left, 1 year crew mission estimate, 240 days, 21 minutes, 26 seconds. And if we cross the main screen to the right, how long do we have on the crew sleep? Right, that's important to keep. And it's counting down from 4 hours to some activity. We are run by GMT time, so we adjust to their, what we call orbit.
So they have a countdown timer telling them when to go to sleep?
They're sleeping right now.
Because if it's 90-minute day to night, since they're orbiting around the Earth really quickly, they see day and night, the sun comes up and goes down every 90 minutes. They don't have the normal 24-hour cycle that we have, so they're on a clock, basically.
So we tell them when to go to sleep. They make sure that there's no lights, right? So they close all windows, shut down. And when it's time to go to bed, it's about 2 hours before going to bed, they start winding down so that your body then reads it as hey, I'm brushing my teeth, I'm about to hop into bed, and and then get some shut-eye. For each seat that you have in front of us, there's probably 20 people in the back that support them during their shift that they spend here. And if they need to, they'll call whoever needs to come in here. Each one of those systems is responsible to manage it within their scope, notify anything to the flight director so they can relay information or make life or death decisions. Flight director, he's the big boss. Anytime that there's a mission decision, he has the power to make whatever it is. So if you don't become an astronaut, one of the really most coveted type of position, somebody that loves space, is that flight director seat. It is extremely difficult, and you're expected to know pretty much everything about the space vehicle and the crew. To the right of him, you see Capcom. That stands for Capcom Communicator. That typically tends to be an astronaut that talks to the astronauts in space. So, for example, the flight director would want them to make an adjustment on their timeline. They communicate that to the Capcom, and the Capcom then talks to the other astronauts. That gives them a level of comfort, so that they can communicate cleanly and clearly, and they know how they feel each other. They feel in their detentions of it. What you see to the right, surgeon. So that's one of our physicians that is monitoring there. We have one in the front, and we have a few in the back room that are on call. Right next to the left of it is BME, which is biomedical engineer. Those are the folks that keep track of all our exercise device and the medical kit, make sure that everything is in working order. They look at the measurements of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then we are able to do that. Those guys make it look easy.
So this is legit, where the most famous of all the Houston we have a problem scenario is played out, where mission control here is trying to, like, in a case like Apollo 13, save the lives and mission in a very extreme way. It's very interesting to see it all. Like, this space is like the history and decisions made here, and like, I guess the legacy and the pride these guys are taking and working these positions. That's something they really consider.
We're going to try to take you now to the Apollo one, actually. So you get to see the red phone.
Really?
The Apollo program, first dreamt up by President Eisenhower and followed to fruition by President Kennedy, was a set of missions aimed at getting man to the moon. In 1969, the task was accomplished with Apollo 11, when Armstrong and Aldrin successfully landed the lunar module and went on for that historic giant leap for mankind.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
More infamous was the doomed Apollo 13 mission of 1970, where an exploding oxygen tank knocked out the spacecraft's propulsion and life support systems, forcing astronaut Jack Swigert to call down to mission control with the fateful words, "Houston, we've had a problem." Fortunately for all aboard, the legendary flight director Eugene Kranz and his team declared that failure was not an option and worked to successfully direct the Apollo 13 crew back home to Earth. That drama unfolded right here 46 years ago, in this room, and to this day, the leadership and contribution of Director Kranz are still honored.
He's one of those individuals that have cemented himself at NASA and allows folks to make sure crews come back safely.
The people at NASA have diligently preserved the history in every detail of this place. From the analog control panels and communication desks to the red phone, NASA's direct line to the U.S. Department of Defense.
Papa John's? Yes. Large pepperoni, double cheese. It's gonna be a long night.
Our time on the moon hasn't ended with Apollo. In fact, amongst the spacecraft being modeled and designed here, Orion, NASA's newest ship, will serve to carry astronauts back to the moon and beyond.
This is where I'm working currently. This is the Orion vehicle. And so this is the low fidelity mock-up. We're going back to the moon similar to what we did with Apollo, except it's Apollo on steroids. And this vehicle it's supposed to fit 4 astronauts and all their equipment on the bottom of the floor. Control panels are right to the head. There'll be 4 seats, 2 seats on the top, and then another 2 seats in the back. From the exercise perspective, we are going to exercise in this little confined space. This is one of the freaking huge challenges that we have.
Wow.
So our challenge is, see at the end of it, that little box, that's basically a big shoe box. And it's located in the position that we think is best for a crew member to be able to have somewhat of a full extension, because we want to get them fully extended as best we can. And right now we're thinking of something of a rowing-like mechanism that we could do. There's about 6 exercise device concepts that we're working on. Some have motors inside of it, so they're servo motors based. We have flywheels that they're testing around. There are a couple other thoughts onto how engineering could make it fit in that box. The other thing that is challenging is minimal power. You can only use about 150 watts of the vehicle power. We want to save power and not produce a lot of heat that it gets sent out to the cabin. We only want the crew member, the astronaut, to be able to produce the heat and sweat. So all that together, it is going to be probably the biggest challenge in there. Now, the duration of this mission is not as long as the International Space Station right now. We're going to be going away for 21 days at the max. When what we want to do is make sure that they keep that cardiovascular fitness that we talked about, and then some locomotion type of activity, so they don't trip if they need to get out, and they have more balance. So it's a huge challenge. And as this keeps maturing, the vehicle becomes smaller and smaller because you're adding everything that you carry out inside of the building. So we call that the net habitable volume keeps reducing. We have to have a minimal that we are planning on, but it provides the challenges for us to see, plan, adjust who is exercising at that time, who's not doing whatever activity it is, and how close this vehicle is. I'm going to put it in perspective. The potty The toilet is in the corner over there. Nobody can use the potty while somebody's exercising, and vice versa. One crew member will exercise, finish their hour. The vehicle then has to bring all the sweat, take it away, dry out the environment, the heat control it, so there'll be about a half an hour of a break. Then the next crew member will exercise. So it's 4 hours stagger up in a big amount of time, because we don't want to put condensations on the panels. That'll be big trouble with the wiring. So those are the things that folks that look at exercise in space and are looking for ideas have probably the hardest time to see. Is we have engineers that are looking at their avionics, what the vehicle can really take. Navigation, so if you are doing a squat, and we use squats a lot, you start swinging the vehicle, right? And you are going to be changing trajectory. So our device have to manage that internally, and if not, we have to work with the engineers to figure out the problem and make sure that we are not off target.
The thing that blew me away the most was thinking about having to consider changing trajectory. It's like the movement that's happening in here. Yeah, you're producing force, but how's that affecting the entire craft? That's something I didn't even consider as something that you would have to consider. I have all these ideas. They're all bad.
1 degree change going to the moon, you may still be able to make it, but you're going to make it at a different site, maybe not the orbit that you want to. Those are really smart flight dynamics people that take care of that. But you imagine 1 degree change going to Mars, where you are going from the Earth there to going to Mars is expected to be about 6 months on the best trajectory we have. That you end up in the middle of nowhere, literally.
I mean, everyone's got to be communicating, right? So like, you may not have like as much of a budget in dollars that you have to work with, but you have a budget in weight, and you have to have a budget in force production, and there's a lot of things that you have to budget for that no one ever has to think about.
Yes. So we separated in subsystems. So we consider the human as subsystems, a system, and we break it apart into different components. The potty, what they breathe, a habitable environment, how they do and perform their tasks. So there's a human engineering component of it. Exercise is a system, and we have also what we call the countermeasures and the health system. So in that sense, I'm a system manager, and I have a set of requirements that are met to keep the astronauts healthy, bring them back in the best shape that we can. And that space, we have the fun stuff, which is paperwork or requirements. And we meet continuously. We plan. We are looking at, if we have a failure, how do we figure it out? All those kind of thoughts are done way ahead of time, so that then it doesn't cost a lot of money to be fixed. Anything that we change now, it's still expensive, but it's not as expensive if we're going to do it 10 years from now, where the vehicle's already built. So we meet and we think about it. We are making sure that all the folks that would play into that, the stakeholders, give their input. So we look at navigation. We all sit down together in a room. We bring all the data that we have. We discuss it, the challenges. What are the concepts of operations? How are we going to run the vehicle, the planning of the mission?
Yeah.
And then everything, all those pieces put together, how does it look today? And how do we want it to look like?
It seems like you have to plan for the downstream effect of any single action that you do. Like, if you're going to exercise, it's not just about exercising to, keep muscle mass and bone density. What type of exercise is it, and how does that affect the trajectory of the vehicle? Like, that's one example of probably many other examples that most people have never thought about for what's the downstream effect of this one problem that you're trying to solve. Is that going to create 3 or 4 or 5 other problems down the line, even though you solved the first problem?
We use a lot of engineering concept from breaking down those fault trees, and you sit down, you describe the scenario that you're looking at. What systems are going to be interacting with each other? What's dependent on each other? And break each one of those boxes down to further detail until you have a solution. So sometimes you'll have one scenario where you have a fault, a failure, or some kind of an off-nominal type of event, and it may result in 7 or 8 different boxes. If you have a fire, for example, my water system may not work after that, which is where I dispense water to drink water. What decision am I going to make at that point? Do I come home, or do I try to fix it? If I'm coming home, how far away from home am I at? What's my worst scenario? For this vehicle is 6 days for right now. So everything we think of 144 hours. And how much water do you need to keep the crew safe? Do we need to have what we call a contingency water, extra water for the astronauts to have, and it's just enough to keep them healthy on return. So you're at survival mode. You just want to come home and live. And so we break down a lot of those trees and communicate with the different groups, rationalize everything, make sure that it makes sense to other people, and we take it down to other folks from us. We all have managers that looked at it from the systematic perspective, and they take it apart at their level. So we revisit things over and over and over and over. It's really a goal of us to never lose an astronaut in space. It's what we're here for as a support.
This is way more complicated than I thought it was going to do.
These are the hardest gains you could possibly get.
A lot of variables and a lot of limitations, and as soon as you start talking about this, I'm thinking, for all you that say, hey, I don't have bumpers, what should I do? Jeez.
You gotta get swole in space.
It's hard to have an excuse not to get your training in when you see what these guys are doing to get the training in. It's important. If it's this important, if it's this important, it's this important here. I mean, in some respects, it's life. It's what will keep it going.
It's what, if you don't use it, you're gonna lose it, and in our particular environment, you lose it quickly. So for anybody out there, it's something that you gotta make the time for.
So just like us, the crew in space makes time to drop everything and train every day. But how do they train in such a cramped environment? And how do you even lift when just one ill-timed bicep curl can sway and knock the entire space station off course? Coming up, we show you what a $1 million space squat rack looks like. And we show you just how sophisticated some of the equipment at NASA really is.
And this is special.
This
These
is a
are
very
NASA sock.
high-tech sock.
While the world's best weightlifters break records at Worlds, we're just down the road at the Johnson Space Center to find out how NASA astronauts train while in orbit. After visiting Mission Control and learning about some of NASA's most iconic missions, we're ready to see how future astronauts will be shaping up for the many adventures ahead. It's time to drop everything and train. We're with the Emil's team in a countermeasure flight hardware training room to learn more about the training gear they've been developing. Considering what we've seen so far, we're sure it's pretty high-tech and clever. So, let's see what a DEET session aboard the ISS actually looks like.
There are three basic pieces of equipment on orbit for exercise. Okay, so we have a cycle ergometer. It's called CVIS. It stands for cycle with vibration and isolation and stabilization. It's isolated from the space station with these spring-locking things back here. And you can see it's a pretty simple design. It's just this cycle would be hooked up to this, which is hooked up to that, and it just kind of bounces around.
Just keeps the vibrations and stuff.
Just keeps the vibration from affecting the spacecraft. Yeah.
Be sure to tell them this is special.
This
These
is a
are
very
NASA sock.
high-tech sock.
Whatever does the job, right?
Yeah.
Apparently, on one of the early missions, this thing was kind of bouncing, banging like this. One of the astronauts thought about it for a while and said, "How about if we just roll up an old sock and stick it in there and try and dampen some of those bangs?"
What a clever solution. It's
seemed to work.
Elegance in practice, right?
It seemed to work, and they've been using it pretty much ever since.
Nothing works like the socks.
What's the typical prescription of dose for how much would be enough?
We could make it do what we want it to do for every person, but we tend to stick with the prescribed rides that we've had for all these years, and it seems to work pretty well. Plus, it gives us a basis of data to look at over the years of how people did in one wake versus another. But everything's done through this control panel here, and we can build anything we want. It gets loaded onto this device, and they can scroll through, pick their name, pick the rides that they want. They're really free to pick whatever rides they want, unless it's something that we specifically want them to try and do.
Just like lifting, can you go harder for longer because the lack of gravity is a little harder to get enough work to get an aerobic effect?
This bike is actually pretty challenging on orbit because you don't have a seat to rest on, and 1G pulling you down, and you have the assistance of 1G pulling you, helping you push through with the pedals. You don't have anything to really hold on to.
Look at Jeff. It almost looks like he's on a unicycle.
Yeah.
He kind of rigged up some of these bogan arm things back there so he'd have something to hold himself or hold on to give himself a little bit more leverage. We kind of describe riding Cevis as riding a unicycle on a trampoline. People have described it as riding a bucking bronco. It's considered very challenging. Some crew members absolutely hate it because it's just a hard device to ride, and it'll whoop you.
So that would go against my assumption. I think, oh, just a cycle. No big deal.
Yeah.
And I'd be the one to get broke on this thing instantly, pretty much.
If you turn the wattage down far enough, anybody can ride on it, but you're not going to get the workouts that you need. So to be challenging, you have to really crank it up a little bit.
I think what we found is that the higher everybody has a limit, and they'll get to a certain limit where they lose their mechanical advantage, and it becomes more like that true unicycle, and it's tough for them. So we have guys that we can put on a regular bike in here with the exact same protocols, breeze through it, heart rate's great, everything looks good. You get them up there, they can't even turn the pedal because the wattage is so high on it. So once you start getting up to, one of my crew members I had, I think his 90% workload was 348 watts. That was his 90% workload. He struggled with that at the beginning. He eventually got through it. I just told him to stick with it, and eventually he got through it. By the end of the mission, he'd have to rest. He could pedal for a little bit through the interval. He'd have to rest for a second and then pedal back up again.
It's a simple means of progression. You suck at it now, you'll get better at it as you stay up there. Just keep trying.
Yeah.
So we want them to continually chase after that high wattage at the peak. So what we've learned over the years that you really don't mess with the peaks. You might just give them more rest, or you might give them a little bit slower ramp up to those peaks. You might make those peaks a little shorter, but you always take them to that peak that they've shown that they can get to on pre-flight. Because if you don't, you're going to come back with somebody that's got a 15% loss if you keep knocking 5 or 10% off of their overall wattage that they're supposed to be training at, then you're detraining them.
And that's kind of our philosophy is to try to get them to.
Some crew members don't like to work in that area. Right? They're programmed to think a different way, and they look at it as, this is the ride that I'm supposed to be riding, and I should be able to complete this ride because you're supposed to be putting this the wattage limits to my abilities, right? And so why are you prescribing something that's outside of what I'm able to do? You're programming it so I fail, and so they don't think of it as a.
Well, I guess in their mind, not being able to complete the task is not associated with a positive outcome.
And you consider the way that they're wired and the way that they're trained to think that they are failing with each ride.
If they can't get through it, it's a fail. They fail. I failed. I can't do it.
Why did you program it so high?
To this point, how easy is it to coach these guys and to get them to be a little patient with the progress, or to get them to trust the process?
I think it's no different than the general population if you're coaching in a gym. I mean, you have the guys that understand that, and you have guys that don't understand it, right? So it's a very broad spectrum.
Was there a lot of advantage to just strapping them down like this guy is compared to that guy?
This is the Russian version. Theirs, they have a little seat. It kind of folds out like a recumbent beach chair or something. You kind of sit in this chair, and then you put these straps on, and it kind of holds you into place.
The Russian bike is not isolated. Ours is. So there's some issues with that.
The system that does not make those structures, we talk about the International Space Station be put together by pieces. Each one of the segments that are put in together are bolts basically put in. If you impart all those vibrations onto the space station, all those seals that you have to each one of the modules becomes more fragile as time goes along. So if you're pulling in, you can imagine the station doing a kind of a synchronous type of fork tuning type of event. So you don't want to cause those the engineering to fail because of something else. So that's why our particularly our U.S. exercise devices all have some form of a vibration isolation system.
Yeah.
It's really, really important. And we talked earlier about kind of mitigating the changes in navigation when you're going in. That helps out with that too. It just absorbs all that energy in there.
Dosing them to get their body to do something, what their body produces vibration-wise, and the sweat and the heat, like that had to be accounted for in the prescription. Is really fascinating.
Well, the vibrations are more, the vibrations in what we're talking about from a heart is more for structure. It's not from anything that we don't care. It's just a structure issue. And we'll get phone calls every now and then. So and so's doing something. What was he doing? But I mean, it's very simple because it does. There's certain frequencies it doesn't like. I mean, I've had pictures. I've seen them where they're in the middle of the station and they're doing a crunch. They're just doing crunches. And you can go all the way out to the solar rays and you can watch the solar rays move at the same rate that they're doing crunches. And it's a very, very small movement. Right. But it was a hard mounted movement. It wasn't isolated, and it'll shake the whole station.
It reminds me of Nikola Tesla. He thought if he produced a small beat, he could make any building fall down from getting the resonance of the frequency matching, and he could tumble it down.
And it's kind of along the same lines.
We've seen the video of that bridge that caught the wind, right?
Well,
it was the right resonance, right? So
you're going to space
trying to avoid
station
that
doing
kind of
that.
stuff.
So, with the cycle work in cardiovascular endurance and physical stamina, what other tools do the guys here have for maintaining strength and power in space?
So let's take a look at this beast. Okay, so this is all for one. This is all for 1G. The device goes from here up to here, up to here, and then these are just mimic or kind of mock-ups of the vibration system. And the vibration system moves up and down, moves backwards and forwards, and rotates in one plane. It doesn't like cyber. It doesn't like to be twisted. So doing any type of torquing on it's not good. That kind of stuff. And we don't like torquing anyway. We don't torquing.
Twerking in space.
Yeah, we're not doing any twerking. The way it works is we have up here, you can't see it, but behind here there's two canisters, two vacuum canisters.
On this side.
And those vacuum canisters provide the resistance. So it works like a reverse bicycle pump. So when you pull again it creates pressure, sucks you back down. We have flywheels built into the stroke, so the flywheels create a little bit of extra mass to kind of simulate a little bit of gravity, give you a little bit of acceleration and deceleration. Not enough to do like Olympic lifting, but there's enough there. The way that you do this is you have a crank handle here, and if you look right here, you can see there's a load. It goes up, it'll go from 0 up to 600 pounds. So, and just by changing the fulcrum, you can change the load.
I was saying earlier, Emil, you need to be able to load pretty heavy because you're not having to also move your own body weight during these drills, right? So 600 is not an unreasonable amount of load if you're up there.
It isn't. Well, when we designed it, we asked for 600, and they actually gave us 600. Most of the time, you ask for something, you always get a little bit less, but we actually got it. I mean, I think the highest we've been to is a little bit over 500. But it's also not the same thing. If you got a 300 person does 300-pound squats and they weigh 200 pounds, well, technically you would think that would be 500 pounds. The problem is when you get to space, you can't just throw 500 pounds on somebody's back if they're not used to having 500 pounds on their back because their spine's not ready for it. And because of the changes in musculature, the changes in the spine, this just happens when you go to space because you grow a little bit and these issues, it becomes kind of tricky. And some people can handle, we usually go around 70 to 75% body weight, added back in. Some, that's a little much, and some it's not. But you just constantly building through it to build them up as they go back through, just like you would down here. Just progress through it. Yeah. It's the same thing. So, but anyway, that's basically the device. We squat with it, we deadlift with it, we bench with it, we do shoulder press. Anything that we want to do, we can probably do except Olympic lifting. Yeah. It'd be nice to be able to do a clean and jerk if we could with it. You know, at least go from a deadlift to overhead or something to that nature, right? And to do that, it requires a very strict vis system that allows for speed because it's going to be frequency dependent as well. So there's a lot of things that go into trying to design that to be able to move that fast and not bottom out the system, which sends load into something.
It seems like it'd be a better way if we can solve the engineering problem. That intent to move very, very fast could maybe give a little bit extra of a training effect if it could be made possible.
Yeah. So
for bone, that rate of force development that we create when we're doing those really fast type movements is critical for that stress to be created in the bone. We see a lot with the Olympic lifters. You see they're about 7 times what normal population would be with a bone mineral density. So we've taken to that and put it as one of our wish lists. Could we get something that we could accelerate through that, through the whole range of motion and get that effect? Then giving us that possible tool in the future could really morph whatever we do in space, shorter time for training, more effective. So all those
More
things.
time to do other things like the critical science.
Yeah.
Are there any other outstanding big challenges that need to be addressed of speed of movement?
Well, speed of movement would be, from a physiological perspective, you got to look at it. When we go, first thing, all we're trying to do is really maintain their kind of pre-flight status. We're not trying to turn them into, elite athletes in space.
Yeah.
That's not what we're trying to do. The only issue we have that we don't normally deal with downhill is bone. We have rapid bone loss, about 1% a month, and we want to try to preserve the bone.
Mm-hmm.
So how we design the protocols and how we put together the protocols is how we deal with the bone, per se. So the idea, I don't necessarily care if somebody gets to a 500-pound squat. All I care about is that they're doing things properly, doing it through a full range of motion, and that we're affecting the bone the way that we need to affect the bone. If they're doing that, their muscle when they come back will be fine. We can rebuild and retrain and get the muscle back fairly quickly. We can rebuild and train the VO2 and get it back pretty quickly. The bone's a different issue. The bone doesn't come back as quickly as the other systems, right? So preserving that is kind of what we focus on from the ARED perspective. And doing that is how we design the protocol. So we squat every single day and we deadlift every single day.
Squat every day.
What we do is we change it. So we'll do what we call a normal squat. We do a wide stance, so a sumo squat.
Yeah.
And we do a single leg squat. We do regular deadlift, we do sumo deadlift, we do RDLs. And the reason being is that every day they're doing a different type of squat. They're doing different load and a different rep scheme every day. So we rotate through 6s, 8s, and 12s. We rotate through sets. So the volume changes every day, the exercise changes every day. And so we're trying to trick the body that it never becomes accustomed to one particular load or another particular load. That's the idea behind it. Since we've got this device on orbit, we've done a much better job. We've probably cut the bone loss in half compared to what we had before. But we're not where we would like to be.
Yeah.
In some bones. And the main area that we look at is in the hip. So it's going to be the femoral neck and the greater trochanter, which is going to be your load bearing that we don't.
Where you can at least afford to have a fracture sometimes.
Exactly, which becomes the other issue, right? So for us, it's triple extension movement those are the areas that we're trying to focus on. So the challenge for us as coaches is the average astronaut that flies on station is about 44, 45. We fly people routinely in their 50s. A lot of these guys come here in their 40s, never squatted before, never deadlifted before, never done anything. So we spend a lot of time pre-flight training these guys just how to squat, how to deadlift.
A bit of awakening
and get them to like it. You go to orbit, you're going to squat every day. You better learn to like it, Yeah. And I think a lot of guys, once they've flown and they've done it, and not only that, but they see the benefit and all the other stuff that they do just by doing it, they start kind of drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, so to speak.
What about upper body stuff? What about pull-ups and push-ups and things like that? How do you load those?
We do bench press, we do shoulder press, we do bent over row, and then we add in the arm stuff to make them happy.
That's what we do.
Guns count.
If we were
Guns in space.
Yeah, you would have no idea. and for us, we could care less. They're in there because they're in there. But if they didn't do it,
motivation matters.
You got to fly that robotic arm.
Yeah. So and you're still kind of even though it can do 35, 40 different exercises, you're still a little bit limited. Push-ups are pretty much can't do them. I'd love to be able to do push-ups and pull-ups, but the funny thing is, from an upper body perspective, you don't lose hardly at all. So You don't lose very much strength. You don't lose much muscle. And actually,
Yeah.
well, it's not because they're not. The upper body's not gravity dependent. Just the from here down is, right. And we've actually seen people gain muscle mass and gain strength in the upper body.
Well, I guess your body, if it has any extra calories or any extra capacity, it sticks the muscle where it's still needed or still thinks it can benefit.
Remember what you're doing with your
Arms
arms.
are your legs.
Decelerating.
You now translate through the space.
Many different things. So
Yeah.
they become your legs. So you're moving, you're attaching yourself, you're pulling things. What you do with your feet is secure them in the different, we saw the Velcros and loops and things like that they have in station. But when they're moving around, their arms are really their primary set of tools. So they're constantly using them. Even beyond, so from the lower extremity to the upper. So they're walking with their hands, they're moving around, they're pulling them. So
Things between their leg or whatever is the way to hold on to it, and they move themselves around. They're grappling this and they're moving that, and their legs are basically carrying things that we would do with our hands. instead of walking.
So I had a weird thought just now, like if
Yeah.
you're in space long enough for multiple generations, we slowly evolve into whale-type creatures. We didn't need our legs anymore. They start kind of drifting up, and we have big muscular arms. More of a future version of the human race in space.
Before we get too much off track, let's see just how much of a beast this machine really is. It's time to find out what it's like to back squat on the International Space Station.
Well, I thought I would want to go to space, but now that I know I can squat up there.
So one of the things too is
I mean, that felt about like that amount of weight, and maybe a little bit lighter.
it's going to be off a little bit on the eccentric portion of it. That's probably where you're going to notice. It's about 80-90% maybe at the most.
Gotcha.
So you're going to notice a little bit of it. The device itself, actually, there's load cells in the plate that are supposedly there to collect the load. That allows us to know kind of when they load up, we know what load they're doing. Right now, if you can see, this system here is our software system. It runs through the computer. Same thing we did on CVIS that you saw. So we would load in the workouts. We write them weekly, bi-weekly, however we want to do it, or bi-monthly. And it brings up, so that they log in, that workout for their day, they follow it. They just dial it in, it collects the reps, it collects the load, collects
Tells
everything.
them what to do. They
Tells them
do
what
it,
to do.
and then it records all the data
And it
for
really
them.
just tells them the exercise and the repetitions to do.
And the load.
The Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, or ARED, is a sophisticated loading system that allows crew members to train multiple barbell movements while in orbit. But it's hard to imagine how they do that without gravity holding them down.
It basically works like a clamshell. So the plate moves and the bar moves, your center of mass kind of stays in the middle, and this thing moves around you. And this absorbs all the vibrations that you would exert into doing if you're doing a squat or a deadlift or whatever you're doing.
That looks like it takes a little bit of practice.
Well, the thing is that when you get into orbit, it's actually, from what I've understood from talking with the crew, it seems a lot of things seem to be a little bit easier because you don't have gravity. So once the bar's on your back, you have one vector pushing you straight down into the platform, and you don't have to. There's a lot of things you don't have to account for, right? So, I mean, he's doing a single leg squat, and if we had him doing that just out of the rack in there, he'd be wobbling all over the place. But in there, he's pretty stable. So, and there is some, with the way that we had to design it, you'll see that there's some range freedoms of motion, but there's some that are taken away too. So there are some things that work.
There are some movements on the beast that look and feel very familiar, and there are others that don't, like deadlifts. We've each done thousands of repetitions of this movement in our own training, but something tells me this machine will surprise us.
Okay. Now, we have to hold these. In space, these just kind of float there, which is nice. But down here, they'll tend to wobble. So, okay, now, I'm not going to say anything, but you're going to notice something when you stand up, but you'll make the adjustment. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you're going to move back. Yep. So, here's one of the flaws with the device. You know what it is? It moves in an arc. So as the bar moves lower to the center of where the arm is, it moves in an arc. So it moves away from you. So normally, look where the bar's starting. We're here. That's not normally where we would start you with the deadlift. We would start you here.
Yeah, that's usually where I start for a clean. So it's
And
not so bad.
and what's really funny is after 6 months of flight, when the guys come home and they're doing RDLs or whatever, That's exactly what they do. They go back to what they've been doing for 6 months. Even though we trained them for 2 years prior the proper way, because the machine
After the
puts
first pull, they pick it up once and they say like, wait.
Yeah, that ain't right.
Because the barbell will start. I mean, it travels in that line, so it's gonna go right up where it's supposed to go, and then they make their adjustments.
All right.
All right.
That feels weird.
It's like you said,
Teach
self-correcting.
deadlift, man.
That's a good RDO.
It's a self-correcting thing.
Yeah, that's
As soon as you
Now,
knee once,
one of the other interesting things, too, guys, is that if you remember from the video, so you have this bar and the plate moving, right? So the plate moves.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things that we think's going on, we don't know it for sure, but a lot of times we'll see range of motion get cut short because in your mind you see angles, you know angles. Like I could close my eyes and do a deadlift and know from kind of where you're feeling where you should be. If the plate is here, so we see, I'll give you an example for on a squat, the angle at the ankle, at the squat, at the bottom of the movement, in the gym and at the bottom is 30 degrees difference. So if you're used to squatting in the gym where you know where that your shin and your relationship and all those angles are, here, because the plate moves this way, your foot's open, you're more in what we would call, plantar flexion. Even though your foot's completely on there, you feel the load through your heel.
Right.
Because that machine's moved in that direction, in your mind, you think you're where you need to be in a correct position, and you're not really there yet.
Changing the angle.
Because you're changing that angle, and that angle then changes the angle at the knee, which will change the angle at the hip.
Yeah.
So you got to constantly remind them, hey, depth, watch the depth, whatever's going on, whatever we need to do with that. Just do the first one. Once you get up, you'll know where you need to be.
Just play around, isn't that cool?
That's good. Oh, I didn't feel anything awkward. So.
Yeah, this is our bench. Bench comes up. Basically supports you from basically your belly button to your shoulder. That's it.
Space curl attachment. That what the cable is for?
Yeah, the cable's there to be able to do upright row, bent over rows,
triceps,
crunches.
That's what I think.
We can do things with the cable that we can do, right?
Like, could you use like a similar harness like you would on that pit truck? You seen the chest harness?
Well, what we could do is we have different types of attachments. So you could put this on. Let's do like a goblet if you want to do goblet squat with it. And one of the other things, like if you look up here on the top really quick, you see these two little bowl holes up there? So I wanted to actually build a pull-up. I wanted to build a pull-up thing to come off, and you could hook into the harness and do weighted pull-ups with it.
Who's got the best curl strength in space? Someone's got to have a competition going on somewhere.
I don't think there's any competition with the arm curls. Anyway, so those are just things we're tossing around. That would be some of the things I'd like to see. I'd like to be able to do pull-ups. I think pull-ups would be great. But anyway, so that's the beast, and it's a very complicated piece of hardware.
This is on the space station now?
It's on the space station now.
The Cycle and ARED provide a balanced training profile, but there's still one more piece of equipment to go. With so much more to show you, why shoot our load all at once? Join us next week, where we'll complete the trifecta, introduce you to some new training buddies, and even try some very fancy workout gear.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Head over to Barbell Shrugged on iTunes and check out our new exclusive show called Talking Depth, where the crew and I are going to nerd out on this week's episode and keep the conversation going.